This is the Volleyball Coaching Wizards Podcast, covering everything coaching, motivated and inspired by interviews and conversations with some of the world's great volleyball coaches. To learn more about the project, visit volleyballcoachingwizards.com. Now here are your hosts, John Foreman and Mark Lebedew.
Welcome to episode 18 of the podcast. The focal point this time is some comments made by Peggy Martin in her interview where she talks about the need to be able to coach players as themselves and not as mini versions of you. So coaching their own personality and not trying to make a player play the way you were or be motivated the way you are or were as a player if that was the case, and to basically deal with them on their own level and on their own terms. Peggy is one of the most successful, decorated, victorious coaches in U.S. collegiate volleyball. She's got over 1,200 wins to her credit in more than 40 seasons, and primarily in NCAA Division II. She's won more than 20 championships, has dozens of Coach of the Year awards, has been about as successful as you could ever imagine. She actually retired from coaching, but after only a few months realized she couldn't take the lack of coaching and got right back in, and it's been, I think, 8 years since that happened. So definitely a woman who's got a lot to say, and this is just a part of it. So take this, and hopefully it'll motivate you to listen more to what Peggy has in her full interview.
I think there's lots of the ways that I have changed in understanding that everyone didn't have the background I had, and everyone is not motivated like to me. I think that once you understand as a coach that these kids are not you, and they are not going to play the same way you do, they are not going to be motivated the same way you are or were, then you become a better coach. You know, you understand that you were motivated because you love the game and you want to play the game and you're a competitor and you want to compete. They're not you. So you have to find the way to motivate each and every one of them for whatever way that they need to be motivated, which is a challenge in coaching.
I guess this particular comment from Peggy struck me as interesting, partly from my experience of working with other coaches who, as much as they would have really liked it to be the case, were dealing with players who were not as good a player as they themselves were when they were younger, or were of a different style, perhaps less enthusiastic or less quick or whatever, less emotional, whatever the case may be. And I think even if you weren't necessarily a player or a great player or whatever, and there's a whole side discussion on whether great players make good coaches and such, that's definitely for another time. But no matter what as a coach, you have a personality, and your personality is going to be different from your players. And so that's why I decided that it made sense to pull this clip, because we're all going to face situations where we have to adapt our coaching to people who don't necessarily see things the same way we do. And, that's one of the challenges.
I think it's a fantastic point. And when I listened to the clip, I just thought about the first 3 years of my coaching career before it was a career, and before I figured out a bunch of things. And she kind of implies, and maybe this is a fair implication, that the people who become coaches are perhaps a little bit more motivated by the sport, perhaps love the sport a little bit better, perhaps are a little bit more competitive, are definitely more control freaks, and have an expectation that all people are like them. And that, as I said, that really resonated with me, because it was a real difficulty when I began working or volunteering as a coach, that the players I was coaching were not as competitive as me and For them, it was a hobby. They went once a week. They played a match. They had one training, and it took me some time to figure out that their motivations to be there were not the same as mine.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely the challenge when you're at, say, like a club level or a low level. Like when I was in England, maybe one of the low level university teams or something along those lines, where, they're kind of there to play. They just it's a fun activity for them. Sometimes it's social, more than necessarily about the sport per se. And if you consider yourself a serious coach, whatever that might happen to mean, you can definitely be frustrating. You've got one idea in mind, and we want to get better, and I need to teach them this stuff, and their motivation is different than yours, and so inevitably it becomes one of those clashes. And actually, to your point about the control freaks, that got me thinking about whether that's changed at all, because for sure, you can look back in time, and I look back at my own coaching, and there was definitely a strong element of I'm going to control this whole thing in one fashion or another. But I wonder if that's changed over the years, or at least with the newer generation, just the way coaching is being taught and encouraged in different ways. But maybe that's a side. Well, no, I guess we can go into that now.
Do you mean you wonder whether you're as much of a control freak as you were when you began coaching, or whether people who become coaches now are as bigger control freaks as we were when we started?
More the latter, because I think personally I am less into the control than I used to be. At least in terms of what's going on in the gym when I'm training the team. I give the players a lot more leeway in what we're doing. And, to be completely honest and blunt, when I first started, I was a driller, like a lot of people of our generation. And when you're a driller, drilling is pretty much all about control. Everything is supposed to be exactly the way it needs to be. And if you shift your mentality into a much more randomly oriented, game-oriented training, you give up part of that control. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I think I will go as far as to say that a lot of drills, the object is to control the group, not to get better. And I think with the organization of some drills, a lot of blocked type practice, one of the attractive things for a lot of coaches is that it's much easier to organize because you have people standing in a line, you have only two balls moving at once, you can see everybody, and it's much easier to see and control and also give feedback and things like that as well than a random practice which has 14, 15 moving parts, and you can't predict from one moment to the next.
Yeah, very true. I also think in a drill situation, because you're constraining things so much, you're also kind of taking out the personality elements of players. So it is easier to kind of, I guess, coach to a level. It's not necessarily that you're coaching to something different than what you are, or trying to coach them to be the way you are. Maybe you are. Maybe that's the motivation for the drills that you pick. But at least there's kind of a consistent mentality about the drills. Whereas if you're letting people actually play more, then they have a bit more freedom and kind of express themselves. Now, yes, the coach can go in and certainly put constraints on that, whether they want to or not. I mean, it doesn't look like there's too many constraints being put on somebody like Ingapeth, but some coaches I know that would completely drive them insane, and other coaches can deal with it. Obviously, T. Lee at this point, can deal with it. And if anybody's going to be the sort of example of I want players who take it like me, then somebody like him or Karch or these guys who had a lot of success in their own careers would seem to be the prime candidates for being in that sort of position. But they've obviously learned, or it's just part of their own makeup that, they need to have the players play as those players are motivated, not as the coach is motivated.
I think to a large degree, maybe this is the difference between ex-players becoming coaches and people who are coaches, because I would suggest that most players are probably a little bit more sympathetic to individual variation, because they were players, they were doing things as they wanted to. But that's purely speculation on my part. I have nothing to base that on.
Well, I mean, Vital basically said that. He didn't say that explicitly in his interview, but it was very much along those lines of, I decided to coach completely the opposite way I was coached because I felt constrained and didn't like it.
Yeah. And a couple of other interviewees, Stelio DeRocco, for example, he and Vital, I asked them both if they felt having been a player was important and a top-level player. And they both said yes, they thought that it made an important difference because they were better able to understand players. And perhaps we can interpret that as being a little more flexible.
Yeah, potentially so.
It's not.
And, I did, in considering Peggy's comment, I did think back to myself. I didn't have a lengthy playing career in terms of being coached.
Yeah.
I played a lot, played a lot of doubles, played a lot of grass, played, pickup volleyball, open gym situations. Even when I was on the club team at the University of Rhode Island, we were very rarely actually coached. The captain pretty much ran training. So I don't have that background in terms of what it felt like to have somebody constantly telling me what to do all the time. And I never rated myself as, the best player ever and everybody should play like me, or had any sort of success in terms of putting myself in a situation where, be like me, not like you. So maybe that because of that, it just never kind of worked its way into my own thing. For me, it's just more, it's kind of like that rec player or at least the player that treats it like recreation when you treat it like serious business. We've all had that sort of conflict. So, that's the mismatch. Not so much in terms of personality, but in terms of expectations.
Yeah. If I think back to when I started coaching, I think I can say directly that one of my motivations to coach was to get it right, because I didn't think any of my coaches had got it right, and I wanted to play. I wanted to be involved with better volleyball, and my coaches had failed me until that point.
Well, I'll admit, when I started actually learning about the sport, there was definitely that element of, hey, how come we didn't learn this? I think the very first coaching-oriented book I read was Ari Sellinger's book, Power Volleyball.
Yep.
And he's talking about the quick offense and all these plays and things, and I'm just going, we didn't even know that this stuff was possible. We were basically playing a brand of volleyball that was from the 50s. We're going, wait, what happened here? And even when I was working with that team, my former team, this was high school, a year or two later, and I was trying to introduce some of this stuff. The coach was like, no, we don't want to waste the time on that. I'm just going, are you kidding me? Come on. This is the fun stuff. This is the stuff the players are going to enjoy doing.
I sadly was probably more along the lines of that my coaches had never just told the guys in the team the right way to do stuff, and that's why they never did it. And now that I'm the coach, I can tell them the right way to do it, and everything will be right.
Yeah. And how did that work out for you?
As I said, Peggy's quote really resonated with me. Because I quickly learned that people don't just do the things that you say automatically just because you say them. So that's the first coaching lesson. And the second lesson is that people are not like you, and they're not. In my case, they weren't as competitive as me. They weren't as motivated as me to be really good at volleyball or to absolutely win this game at all costs. And I did a lot of screaming and yelling in that period as I tried to get across what I thought was the required level of competitiveness, of motivation, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, Peggy's thing was really spot on. And once I worked it out that I have to work a little bit differently, I have to make some kind of allowances, I have to understand the people I'm working with better, the whole coaching experience became much better for me, and not insignificantly for my players.
Now, let me ask you this. Did you ever have kind of that epiphany moment early in your coaching career when you kind of thought back to yourself as a player and how even though the coach told you 50 times, you didn't actually change something or do what they want? And it just kind of dawned on you why that might have been?
Actually, I don't think so, no. Right now, I can't think of that situation because I was always right. So
exactly.
I never, when I was a player, I was always right, and I did it because I was right. And when I was a coach, I told people to do it because I was right. So I never had that moment of thinking, of putting myself in the player's shoes in that way.
So you were blessed with a lack of doubt.
I was blessed, I think, with a lack of intelligence, and I would probably not use the word blessed either, because I think in this coaching is one thing where lack of doubt or lack of intelligence is not really very good.
Yeah, probably not. Although the irony of that on the doubt side of things, not the intelligence side of things, is that you get in trouble if you show doubt. You should have it, but you can't show it.
Oh, no, absolutely not. You're never allowed to show doubt.
No.
No, you have to remain absolutely sure in what you do.
Well, and it's like what we were talking about in the Neville podcast about the setter, where you were saying the setter needs to appear to have the answer, whatever the challenge is, and you made the comment that basically the coach is the same. The coach should elicit confidence in the players that he or she has the answer to whatever problem they're facing.
I'm convinced of that, and I don't think you can convince me otherwise. I've had conversations with people about this topic, and I've said that that coaches and players are always acting in some way, shape, or form. So they're always projecting something that they want others to think, or that they want others to understand. And the conversation I had was that people aren't stupid, and they can read through your acting. And to which I said, well, I don't agree.
Well, and to the extent that they can, does it matter? I mean, yeah, there's a point where you're being obviously just fake. And if people pick up on that, then that's bad. But
well, that's not really acting, then, is it?
Well, it's I mean, acting is by definition being fake, but yeah, there's a sincerity involved to not being fake, I suppose.
I just know, no, I shouldn't say no because we're in the realms of things that are unknowable. But I'm certain I've been aware of situations, seen situations. The players have told me, for example, of times when they felt that the negative mood of the coach has impacted on performance and directly led to poorer performance and losing matches.
Yeah. Well, and I've recently had a discussion with one of the coaches that I work with here who works with young kids. Yeah, I think he works with 12s and 14s primarily. And we've talked just about body language and coaches' presentation to the players and how things can be read. Because, the thing we have to realize as coaches is we're getting looked at all the time. And a lot of times we don't necessarily realize what the kids or the players are picking up and remembering. Yeah. And sometimes it's not always the most, a lot of times it's the embarrassing stuff that you'd wish they didn't remember at all. But he was talking about trying to deal with a situation of, trying to let kids be okay with making mistakes and not being afraid and looking over to the sideline and all that. And we were talking about how, he needed to be cautious about the body language he used. Not that he was being negative. He was trying to be positive and, encouraging. But, he was basically trying to avoid the situation where he was looking at the player who made the mistake and, and in doing so, making them feel guilty when that wasn't the intention. So he had talked about, I intentionally don't look at them. So, well, the one concern you have there, and you have to be careful of, is, coach won't look at me because I made a mistake.
Yeah.
That's one of those things. It can go either way. And it's that fine line that we end up walking, and partly it's a function of having to understand the players we've gotten. Even when I was in Sweden, I was observing a coach in the second division, and when the team was doing well, was playing well, he was up on the sideline and he was moving around. And he was fairly animated, but if they went into a bit of a slump, next thing I know, he's sitting, and I'm sure he didn't realize what the difference of that presentation to the players could be.
Yeah.
Okay, we're playing bad and coach doesn't trust us anymore. We lost him. So
I think that's exactly correct.
Yeah.
And I think my irrefutable argument in favor of acting working is body language and studies on body language and how important it is and how people interpret things, and you can control body language. And there are also studies that mood can follow words, mood can follow body language and actions, and you can affect not only your own mood, but you can affect others' mood by doing exactly that, and you have an obligation to, I think, use all the tools, however complicated and complex and difficult and discouraging and all those things that make coaches insane.
Yeah. Well, I can remember when I was at Exeter thinking to myself while I was standing on the sidelines, don't cross your arms or make sure you do this or whatever. And you find yourself thinking about all these, other things beyond what's happening on the court. And you go, wait a minute. Okay. Let's get this under control a bit here. But the question I wanted to ask you was, in terms of the professional players, because we talked about the younger players and the kind of recreational players, but what sort of variation do you see in the motivations of professional players?
Professional players are people. I know that people don't always consider them to be people, but any group of people that you want to choose have the range of normal characteristics that people have. Some people are more or less competitive than others. Some are more or less hygienic than others. Some are more or less good people. They're exactly the same as any other group of people. They're probably on average physically fitter. Volleyballers are on average significantly taller than most other populations, but in a team you'll find the same people that you'll find anywhere else, and some people are more competitive than others. And to a degree, it surprises me to this day that you can become a professional player without being insanely competitive. And but that's also just the way it is, and there's a reason that only some people are great players, and there are a reason why only a few people win over the course of time. That's why not everybody wins, because even in that group of people, i.e. professional volleyballers, there are differences, and they come out at the end of the day on the scoreboard.
Well, and to that point, to the idea of winning, and this actually brings me back to the book that motivated the idea of Volleyball Coaching Wizards. There was an interview with a guy who was one of these traders in this Market Wizards book that I talked about in our kind of episode 0. His kind of famous quote, or paraphrase anyway, is that you get what you want out of the markets. Meaning, if you're in it to make money, then okay, you'll be working toward making money. But if you're in it to have stories to tell your friends, either to commiserate or to puff yourself up, then you're going to be doing different things than necessarily the things that you'd do if you were strictly in it to increase the value of your retirement account.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as players, and I'm sure as coaches as well, there's probably the element of, okay, for some players, winning is what matters. That the scoreboard is the be all and end all of their experience. For others, what they consider winning isn't necessarily scoreboard related. And I think that's something that you definitely see variation on at the different levels of the sport, and perhaps between the genders to a greater or lesser degree, somewhere along the way. Is for some, it's the social side of things. It's being part of a team. So it's not necessarily winning the championship, but it's being part of the team.
Yep.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Kobe Bryant?
Okay. What does Kobe say?
Kobe Bryant's famous thing was, friends come and go, but banners last forever.
All right. So he just said what he's after.
Yeah. He doesn't care about relationships. He only cares about winning or losing.
Right. And I'd be willing to bet that for most female volleyball players that I've coached over the years, it's more the relationships afterwards. Which isn't to say it's all of them, because I've known some really, really competitive players.
Yeah.
But when they look back, it tends to be the relationships they had with their teammates than it was about the wins and losses.
It's always the thing that you remember the most. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
You remember the relationships much more strongly than the victories, because it's a Phil Jackson / Tex Winter quote that you're only successful in the moment that you have success.
Right.
After that, you are just you're just normal with one extra medal in your cabinet or a trophy on your wall. It doesn't change anything. But the victories, well, not the victories, but the whole process is a shared experience you have with a group of people, and the shared experiences are things that help a lot in performance, was the whole objective of the famous Doug Beal USA volleyball outward bound situation or experiment, maybe.
Yeah.
And these are the shared experiences are the things that are memorable,
Right.
things that stay.
Right. And I happen to be at an anniversary point in terms of my own coaching, where a couple of years ago, it was the Exeter women making it to the semifinals of the UK University Championships. And
Yes, I saw.
And that will be, and that will be something that, I will be really proud of that team for a long time, even though we didn't actually win anything. We didn't win a league championship. We were tied, but we came in second on the tie break. We didn't win the national championship, but we did as well as we could have possibly done. We didn't win the regional club championship. We didn't win a cup competition. So, at the end of the day, we didn't have any banners to hang on the wall, but it was a great experience, I think, for everybody. And I will remember that even more than, all the matches that we won that season, or the ones that we lost.
Yeah.
We're running short on time. Any final comments?
Always try to bring it back to the original quote. And I think it's a really important part of learning to be a coach, of improving as a coach, is making that step that Peggy talks about, in understanding that firstly, players are different from you, and secondly, the players are different from each other, and that your role and responsibility as the coach is to find the individual triggers. I think that's maybe has a negative kind of connotation these days, but the individual triggers that motivate people, that provide the spark to get them to do the things that they need to do. I almost said to get them to do the things you want them to do, but I'm not like that anymore.
All right, we'll wrap it there.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. For show notes and more, visit volleyballcoachingwizards.com/podcast. Got an idea for a future episode or want to ask a question? Send an email to podcast@volleyballcoachingwizards.com.